We are going to be doing edge-to-edge quilting using the Embroidery Sampler Set Design Collection. I have here a quick and simple quilt top. It's just a piece of focus fabric that I've got 4.5-inch borders around. I have it basted together. I've got it sandwiched with my backing and my batting, and then I did run a basting line right around the outside edge of it. I used fusing powder on this to make sure that the layers all stay together. You could use fusible batting. I like the fusing powder. It works really well for me. To get this started, because we're doing it on a quilt, we have the luxury of doing it starting in the middle, like I would do when I'm doing regular guided quilting. I marked my center line right here, and we're going to be using that to position all of the designs. One quick note is that we're going to be going left to right, so I actually have kind of gone a little bit skinny on the overage on my backing on this side and pushed as much as I could over to the right, and that will make sense in a couple of minutes. So this line right here is the line that we're going to center the embroidery design on. So here's my hoop, and like always, we are just going to center this line in the embroidery hoop. The style of edge-to-edge quilting that we're doing is pretty forgiving, so if you are not exactly centered exactly in a straight line, then this kind of edge-to-edge quilting is going to easily accommodate that for you. Okay, we are ready to go to the embroidery machine. I am going to quilt this in a gray color so that I minimize how much that quilting is going to stand out on the front of the quilt. I have chosen a bright background though, so hopefully we'll be able to see the contrast on the back to see what the quilting actually looks like. Over here at the embroidery machine, I have loaded up the design. Looking at how I have the quilt hooped and how the design came into the screen, I do need to rotate that 90 degrees. You'll have to check that for yourself depending on the hoop that you have. So there we go. I just rotated it 90 degrees on the screen and it went over to the embroidery mode. First thing is we're going to put the hoop right on the machine, making sure that you've got all of your edges accounted for. Last thing you want to do is quilt something down and under. And I have a 7x12 hoop here, and the design is just under about 6x10 or 6x9, so I will be able to move it up in the hoop. But for argument's sake, because it's a little bit easier for you to see, I have the needle position set up to be centered on the lower center portion of the design. So you can see, hopefully right here, here's that marked line, and then here is the dot showing where the center of the center bottom of the embroidery is. I'm going to switch that up to the top, and you'll see I did a pretty good job. I am off by just a little bit, but it's going to be fine. Now I'm going to go ahead, now that I have it hooped, and move the design up in the hoop. So that looks like as far as I can move it, which is pretty actually perfect. So I will be just a hair outside where the binding is. I do have cotton thread in the bobbin and in the needle, and I have a brand new needle in. The design's loaded. It is a 2-minute stitch out, so let's go ahead and get that done. Back at the embroidery machine, I have my previous stitching in the hoop back here. Here's my line that I'm going to line up my embroidery design on. Just to show you, if I go to the top of the design, which is where I am right now, I am on that line. Sorry about that. But if I come to the bottom, I'm going to be at least 1/4 of an inch off of my marked line, and it's all going to be fine. So what I need to do now is find the top center of the design. That's right here. And what I need to do is get these two sets of stitching pretty close to each other. So I'm just going to move straight up in the hoop. If I move all the way up, then I am overlapping the previous stitching, so I'm just going to come down a few clicks. I must be hooped a little bit at an angle because now I am slightly off of my center mark. And that, I mean, I could move it over the 4 clicks to get it to line up, but I'm going to leave it just like that. Repeat number 2. The second hooping is done. Here's the first hooping, and here is the second hooping. You can see that they started pretty much exactly in line with each other, but the way that they're put together, I do have the ability I can shrink that or increase that gap, and no one will ever know. So back to the front of the quilt. I have put a little piece of tape right here just to denote the end of the last stitching, since everything's blending in so much. Okay, on the front of the quilt back here, here's the line that was marked at the very beginning. This pink piece of tape right here is just showing where the previous stitching is ending, since it's a little bit hard to pick that up on camera. The design is 9.1 inches long, I believe is what my embroidery machine is saying. So 9.1 is about 9 1/8, which means that the embroidery design is going to finish stitching here, and there will be some blank space at the end. That 1.5 inches or so needs to be quilted, but I'm not going to do an entire repeat there. Because it's only about 1.5 inches, what I'm going to do is increase the length of the embroidery design to about 10.5 and leave the width exactly where it is. So I will fill the space that I have left behind. If you can't get all the way to 10.5 inches, then you've got a couple of tricks that you can do. You can increase the spacing right here and step down a little bit more. In a perfect world, you want to quilt just off the edge of the quilt into the batting. So now let's get that last one hooped up. At the opposite edge of the quilt, just as at the beginning, we need to make sure that the batting is in the hoop, that the batting and the backing are properly secured. Small change in plans. You might notice that I'm hooped a little bit differently. I went ahead and hooped it the reverse of what I had done before, so the part that I had previously quilted is down here at the front of the machine instead of at the back. It's just going to make it easier for me to illustrate what's going on, and I did put my piece of pink tape right back on there. So, right now I have the embroidery design just as it is. It has not been resized at all, and there's my hoop on the machine. If I check, then right here is the bottom center of the design, and that's going to leave me over 1 inch of space between the end of hooping number 2 and the beginning of hooping number 3. But at the upper end, it's going to be pretty much exactly where I like it. Because I want this space down here, at the bottom to be bigger, or to be less, I want to decrease that gap and make the embroidery design bigger. I'm going back into Edit, resizing my embroidery design one dimension only until it's about 10.5. Now if I go back over to embroidery, then I can see that the bottom of the design is way down there. It looks like it needs to move up. And the top of the design is short. So I can take that design and, while I'm still in embroidery, move that up and then use my trace function to check the bottom again. I'm going to be overlapping by just a hair, but that's going to be fine because this is such a loose and loopy and forgiving machine quilting design. So off comes the piece of pink tape. Let me turn on my little pointer so that you can see that I am going to overlap my previous stitching by just a couple of stitches and only right here on this edge. So press your foot down and quilting the third repeat. Okay, here is the third hooping done, and here is the back of the design. Obviously I have some repair work to do right here since I did not check and I got the backing and the batting in there, but I'm going to save that for later. Here is that point where the two designs overlap. Because everything is not lined up on any kind of square or rectangle or anything, we can overlap the designs and it's perfectly fine. So here's the first row, all the way complete. It's right here. Here's that first row, all the way done. This design is 5 3/4 wide. So for my next row, I am going to space that just 6 inches off. That gives me 1/4 of an inch for any kind of wiggle room, and it'll be something that is not going to be visible to anyone's eyes. So here's my 6-inch ruler, my previous line that I had marked, and so here is the next line. So it's time to hoop it up and get started again. Now don't forget also, you can take this design and you can rotate it and you can flip it. It has no connectors on the end, so you can make it spin whatever direction you prefer for even more variability. Back to the embroidery machine again. I'm hooped on that center line. The first thing to do when you're at your embroidery machine is go back into Edit and resize your design if you sized it at all when you stitched out that last hooping. Now I can go back over to embroidery and check where the top of my design is going to be and the bottom of my design is going to be. As much as I tried to make it a little bit different, that's exactly just about the same place it was before, so I'm going to move it up a little bit so that they aren't perfectly aligned with each other. I'm ready for the end of the second row. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before with measuring, and the design is right at 10 inches. I'm still going to want to increase the length of it a little bit. Here is the last hooping of the second row. This right here is where the design is going to start, and all the way down here is where the previous design ended. So I've got at least an inch there that I need to think about. Down here at the bottom, it looks like I've got something closer to 3/4 of an inch right here. So I am going to, in a straight line, move everything down. And now it looks like I'm going to quilt just off the end of the fabric into the batting, and that's all good. As long as you are quilting into the batting and the backing, it doesn't matter if you have come off the edge of the top. And because we basted the edge of the quilt top down, you don't have to worry about it getting lifted and turning. Here's the back of the quilt as it stands so far. These are the rows that we've done going across, and you can see that there's some variations in how far apart the designs are, but overall it looks really cohesive, and you can't tell that there's some minor misalignments going on. The space that I have to quilt in is, I think that's my tallest point, is about 7.5 inches from the top of the quilting to the edge of the fabric. And that fabric does have 1/4 inch for the binding worked into there. So this is 7.5 inches, and I have a 5 3/4 inch design to fill it. I'm going to make 2 changes to minimize how much of a gap you can see at the top. First of all, I'm going to, when I get to the embroidery machine, make the design as wide as I can. I know that I won't be able to get to 7.5 inches, but I can get larger than my 5.75 that I am now by about 20%. So that'll put me up close to 6.5. I also need to take this line and move it up a little bit so that I can have a little bit larger of a gap here than I had back here, but that's one of those things that people aren't going to be able to readily see. Alright, this is the hooped project. I had just barely enough to be able to hoop it properly without making any kind of adjustments, so I got kind of lucky there. Otherwise I would have had to sew that extra piece of stabilizer on here or have the design be not quite centered in the hoop. Whichever one ends up working best for you and your machine, they are both great ways to make that adjustment. The first section of that last row of quilting along the top is finished. Remember, we stretched that out from 5.75 to 6.9 inches, and it fills that space pretty well. I've got about 3/8 at the top and about 3/8 at the bottom, so it's not something anybody is going to notice. On the back, here we are again. These rows are the standard size, and then this is the row that's stretched out in this direction. If you look pretty critically, you can see that this flower is stretched a little bit compared to this one, but if you're not looking for it, nobody is ever going to see it. So now I'm going to go and finish these last 2 hoopings on the top. I am going to probably have to increase the length of the design right here to make it come all the way out to the edge, just like I've done on the 2 prior rows of stitching, and then I can just do those couple of rows at the bottom and I'll be done. I am on the very last row of the quilt and the very last block that needs to be quilted. Everything is being challenging here at the end. First of all, I completely emptied my spool of thread, so I'm having to deal with that. Somehow, I had a little problem with the length of my batting here, and I'm not sure how that happened, so I spliced another piece in using fusible. And I ended up too short here at the bottom to be able to hoop it properly. So I have gone and taken a piece of stabilizer and just roughly basted it to what little backing I had on the quilt right there. So that is what I'm actually going to hoop, because I can't get all of the fabric in the hoop and still have enough room to stitch out my design. And go ahead and hoop this. And I am going to take this to the embroidery machine, and when I'm finished I will just rip the stitches and take this piece of stabilizer